Welcome to Podkey Slopcast, where AI policy fights and workplace agents get stress-tested. A lot of this week's AI news sounds settled when it's really still half-built, half-spun, and full of incentives pulling in different directions. The interesting question isn't just what got announced, it's who gains leverage if the story lands the way they want. The Anthropic export control suit is a clean example of a technical system colliding with legal categories that were built for older kinds of trade. Legion's argument is basically that serving code or text from a model to a user is not an export in the traditional sense, so the government's ban overshoots what export control law actually authorizes. That claim is not frivolous. Export law usually turns on what is being transferred to whom and across what boundary, and AI inference doesn't map neatly onto shipping a controlled good or handing over source code. But there are two separate questions here. One is whether the administration stretched the statute, the other is whether courts will ever fully answer it before politics and negotiation take over. Analysts seem to think the legal challenge has real teeth, while also thinking it probably won't end in some grand precedent-setting verdict. That matters because uncertainty itself becomes policy. If companies think the government may push aggressive controls and the courts may take years, they may change behavior long before any judge says who was right. So even if Legion's reading is stronger on the law, the practical outcome could still be a settlement, revised guidance, or a narrower backroom compromise instead of a bright legal line. The White House pressing Meta to join Commerce Department model testing raises a familiar issue. How voluntary is voluntary when the request comes from the government and everyone can see who's still resisting? Meta is the obvious holdout, and that makes the pressure legible. Join the process and you accept oversight norms. Refuse and you risk looking uniquely reckless, even if your legal position is defensible. Critics calling this voluntary in name only have a point. Informal pressure is still pressure, especially in a sector where future regulation, procurement access, and antitrust posture are all in the background. At the same time, the flip side is that purely optional safety programs can be too weak to matter unless there is reputational cost for staying out. The deeper question is what these reviews actually cover. If the scope intentionally excludes NSA-style security vetting, then the oversight may be meaningful for some safety questions while leaving out the hardest national security ones. So both narratives can be true at once. The administration may be leaning on companies harder than the word voluntary implies, and the resulting testing may still be shallower than critics of frontier models would want. The new trade threat language around Chinese robots is worth slowing down on because the words doing the most work are threat, subsidized, and in America. Commerce Secretary Letnick warned that state-subsidized Chinese robots could pose threats domestically, and lawmakers circulated a screenshot of a $17,990 humanoid robot on Amazon, as if that listing itself proves urgency. It doesn't. A product listing shows market entry, not national security harm. That doesn't mean the concern is fake. If the fear is dependency on subsidized hardware, hidden telemetry, compromised supply chains, or strategic underpricing to wipe out domestic competitors, those are real categories governments already use in telecom and industrial policy. But if that's the case, policymakers need to specify which risk they're actually targeting, because tariffs, import bans, and security reviews solve different problems and impose different costs. A tariff might slow adoption and protect domestic manufacturers, but it can also make useful automation more expensive for American warehouses, hospitals, and factories. A national security ban is a much stronger claim and needs stronger evidence than a scary screenshot and a cheap sticker price. The second-order effect here is easy to miss. If the US treats embodied AI hardware as the next strategic choke point, robotics policy may start to look less like consumer tech policy and more like chips. On the product side, the coding story is shifting from smarter autocomplete towards systems that can own a goal over time. xAI's goal primitive, paired with a fine-tuned Grok model and Cursor's Composer 2.5, is pitched around a simple promise. You state the outcome, then sub-agents plan, execute, and verify the work. What's notable is not just the model, but the orchestration layer. Earlier code systems often looked impressive on isolated tasks and brittle on longer chains of work because there was no reliable loop for planning, checking, and correction. Adding verification matters because raw autonomy without a checking mechanism mostly just scales mistakes faster. The strong version of the bullish case is that multi-agent orchestration beats single-pass code generation on real software tasks because software is already a process of decomposition, testing, and iteration. The weak point is evaluation. Cost-effective performance sounds good, but these systems can hide complexity behind demos. The real benchmark is whether they reduce human oversight enough to matter without creating subtle failures that engineers spend hours unwinding. Still, the broader trend is clear. Prompting line by line is giving way to delegation, where the useful unit is no longer a command but a goal. ByteDance's C-Dance 2.5 pushes video generation in the dimensions people actually feel: longer clips, higher resolution, and more reference consistency. 30 seconds at up to 4K, plus support for 50 reference objects instead of 12, suggests the system is getting better at maintaining coherence across more moving parts. The first-time ability to ingest image, video, and audio references together also matters more than a spec sheet bump, because multimodal conditioning is what lets generated video behave more like directed production and less like visual improvisation. The speculation that ByteDance may be leveraging TikTok data as a recursive feedback loop is plausible in the abstract, but it remains speculation from the material we have here. What's fair to say is that a company with massive real-world video interaction data has structural advantages in understanding what people watch, remix, and reward. Whether that directly maps to the exact training loop people are imagining is a separate claim. So the grounded takeaway is capability expansion. The stronger unproven narrative is that distribution data is becoming a self-reinforcing moat for generation quality. The KPMG and UT Austin study may be one of the more useful workplace findings because it shifts the focus away from access and toward behavior. Across 1.4 million interactions, the highest impact users treated AI as a reasoning partner instead of a magic vending machine for perfectly tuned prompts. That sounds almost obvious, but it cuts against a lot of AI training culture, which still overemphasizes prompt tricks instead of problem framing, iteration, and guidance. The practical implication is encouraging. If collaborative behaviors are teachable, then AI ROI isn't just about buying licenses or waiting for a genius class of prompt whisperers to emerge. It becomes an organizational capability problem. Can teams define tasks clearly, inspect outputs, and keep the human in the loop where judgment matters? The caveat is that interaction volume doesn't automatically prove causal business value. High-impact users may already be the strongest knowledge workers, but as a roadmap for adoption, this is much more actionable than vague claims that everyone simply needs more AI. Claude Tag takes that reasoning partner idea and embeds it directly into Slack, which changes the social and operational texture of AI use. Instead of opening a separate chatbot window, teams can tag Claude inside the place where work already happens, carry ambient context across threads, and hand off tasks like pull requests or incident response. That reduction in friction is a big deal. A tool people don't have to leave Slack to use gets adopted by people who would never become heavy standalone chatbot users. Anthropic saying 65% of its product team's code now originates from Claude Tag is a striking figure, but it needs interpretation. Originates from is not the same as ships without human review, and it doesn't tell us whether the system is writing boilerplate, tests, critical logic, or some blend of all three. The more interesting shift is architectural. This is not an assistant waiting for one prompt. It's a persistent coworker that can stage plans, choose tools, and complete multi-step work across channels. That is powerful, and it also explains the trust and privacy anxiety. An AI present in every channel can feel less like help and more like ambient monitoring, even if the stated purpose is productivity. There's also a workplace politics angle. The person who introduces the agent may look efficient to some colleagues and like they've invited surveillance for everyone else. Adoption is not just a technical rollout, it's a trust negotiation. That's the thread running through all of this: more capability, more leverage, and more arguments about who gets to define the guardrails. Thanks for listening to Podkey Slopcast. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.